Okay, now I'd like to say a little bit about the agenda that we've got planned. If I could get the next slide, we have an hour and a half for this conversation. We've allocated 10 minutes for opening remarks. And besides what I've got to say at this moment, you'll be hearing from the director of the National Center, Brian Manwaring. Brian has held that position for 7 years and has worked in the environmental conflict resolution field for over 20 years, specializing in large, complex water resource management challenges. Brian will explain a little bit more about what the foundation does, what the National Center does, and what these two service areas do. And then we'll hear from Rachel Hamelman, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, Rachel. Rachel is a program associate at the National Center and also is the coordinator for our training program. And Rachel is kindly handling the technology for the webinar today, so she'll share a few refresher tips about using the Zoom platform. Following Rachel's comments, I will introduce our first esteemed speaker, who will be Stephanie Lucero. Stephanie, if you'd raise your hand. As I mentioned, Stephanie is the lead for the National Center's Native American and Alaska Native Service Area, and she will be sharing insights from her experience with working with data sovereignty within the context of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution processes. We have about 15 minutes set aside for that. And then we'll be saving questions for the end on both presentations. Bear with us. After Stephanie's piece on data sovereignty, I'll say a little bit more about our next esteemed speaker, who is Mike Durglo. For now, know that Mike is the climate change coordinator for the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. And Mike will be sharing some principles underlying his approach to facilitating collaboration on climate change challenges, and focusing in on one particular success that he had in facilitating a collaborative process around cultural resource protection in partnership with the Glacier National Park. And when Mike is done, we will, if all goes well, have 20 minutes left for Q&A with you all. And because there's so many people on the line, we're going to do that through the chat screen. If you have any questions as we go along, well, actually save them till that Q&A session. And then Elise is going to, Elise Megan, my colleague at the National Center, who works closely with me on endangered species recovery in the Missouri River, has also been helping with this webinar. And Elise's job on this webinar, Elise, if you wouldn't mind waving, is to curate the questions that you put in the chat screen to look for the themes in those questions. So she will then come off mute and pose a question to our speakers based on, clusters of questions that you all pose. So when that is over, we will wrap up closing remarks and send you on your way. Without further ado, let me turn the floor over to my kind colleague, Brian Manwaring, the director of the National Center.
All right. Thank you, Marcy. And just welcome and thanks to all attendees for joining us today. We know there's a lot of stresses on your time, and we have a great turnout, and it just, I think, shows the importance of the topic. And thank you for being here. Thanks to Mike for making the time to join us as well, to present with us today. As Marcy mentioned, my name is Brian Manwaring. I'm the director for the National Center. I'm joining you here from Tucson, Arizona. And as Marcy mentioned, I just want to provide a quick introduction to the organization, to the agency, just to ground ourselves in that. So the National Center is one of several programs in a agency called the Udall Foundation. The Udall Foundation is a small independent agency in the executive branch. We were established by Congress back in 1992. The National Center was added back in 1998. But we're small. As I mentioned, the foundation as a whole is about 30 folks, give or take. And we're headquartered here in Tucson, which makes us quite unique. Our namesakes are Morris and Stu Udall, and the foundation was created to honor and carry forward the legacy of both Mo and Stu, who were both in their capacity as representatives in Congress, and also Stu as Secretary of the Interior. Both of them left an impact on the environment and the relationship between the federal government and tribal nations. So we look to promote and forward that legacy by promoting leadership, education, collaboration, and conflict resolution in the areas of the environment, public lands, and natural resources, and to support and strengthen Native nations by supporting their own self-governance. So the National Center, and you can see on the slide here, we're here, and as Congress created us to enhance collaboration and resolve conflicts involving the environment, natural resources, and public lands, where there is a federal interest of some sort. We do that through these 3 categories of services. 1, we provide case services, so mediation, facilitation, assessment. 2nd, training and program support. So training and really capacity building. So we have a training program. We do these kinds of webinars periodically. We also offer 2 to 3 day more robust training courses, both virtually and in person, on a number of topics, from fundamentals in environmental collaboration and conflict resolution to collaboration with Native nations and tribal consultation. And then 3rd, we provide what we call ECCR leadership. ECCR is our acronym for Environmental Collaboration and Conflict Resolution, but basically to promote and support the broader use of these tools within the federal government and their partners. So just to say that our staff here in our small program, in our small agency, are experienced and skilled mediators and facilitators and trainers, and we have across our staff special expertise in a number of specific subject areas, both procedural and content-based. 2 of those areas, as Marcy mentioned earlier, are contained really within our 2 service areas: Native American and Alaska Native Service Area and the Climate Service Area. So these groups really work to support and improve the work occurring with and between the federal government and tribal nations. That's our NAN, or our Native American Alaska Native Service Area. And then our Climate Service Area really focuses on enhancing collaboration on climate-related initiatives. So these are things that we find that are really important to the work that we're seeing today. And I imagine you're here because you're seeing it as well. So the webinar is really leaning in to the collaboration expertise that we bring forward on these 2 areas. And with that, I'd like to turn it to my colleague, Rachel, who will take us through some logistics.
Sure, thanks, Brian. So we have, today we do not have a Q&A for our webinar today. We are going to use the chat. So you can feel free to chat, everyone. There should be a section there that says all panelists and attendees. So we'll all get your questions so you can see what other people are asking. As well, if you have any specific questions on logistics or any Zoom problems, you can send a chat directly to the hosts and panelists, and we can work that out with you. Me and Elise will be helping you out if you have any issues there. But that's how we're going to be doing questions today. So please feel free to do that. As Marcy mentioned earlier, we would love for you to all maybe wait a little bit until the presentations are over to kind of formulate your questions, and then we'll be taking them at the end in a discussion period. So we also do want to do a little bit of introduction. So thank you all for coming today. We had a lot of registrants for this webinar. We have a lot of people on today, so it's really great. This is actually our 4th webinar that the Climate Service Area has hosted or co-hosted, our last one being last year. And so we actually have over 200 people that registered for this webinar, and we have a lot of different people that are here. As you can see, not all of the names of the organizations represented are on the screen here, but we have a good mix of federal employees, state employees, people that are not in the government, and then tribal governments as well, and organizations. And so we have about 28 federal agencies represented here today. That's about 65% of our registrants. And we also have employees and staff from 6 tribes that were noted in our registration. So, and we've got a good mix from colleges and universities too. So I just wanted to welcome you all, and we're very excited to have you here today. So I'll pass it over to Marcy to get us going.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much. I don't remember if you mentioned if people want to introduce themselves through the chat screen, that would be wonderful. Name and affiliation, where you're located. Okay, so for the next few minutes, I want to share with you some real targeted takeaways from a 2021 report that the National Center did that provided the context for launching the climate service area at the National Center, and also provides context for why we're doing the webinar we're doing today. So the report is called Environmental Collaboration and Conflict Resolution in Support of Federal Climate Initiatives, an Assessment of Opportunities. And next slide. The approach we took to doing this report was that we did a series of interviews, telephone interviews with senior federal colleagues working in the climate arena. And we spoke ultimately with 16 people from 16 different departments, agencies, or bureaus, 22 people as a whole. And then we looked for themes in what they had said. We were exploring 3 themes. One is, what constraints or barriers does your agency face in terms of doing climate related work? And by climate related, I'm using that as a very broad term to include climate change, risk, resilience, mitigation, adaptation, related endeavors. I was just looking for one phrase that would capture all of that. So we were looking for the constraints or barriers the agencies face in doing that work, related conflicts or complex challenges that the agencies don't feel they can handle on their own, and ways that the interviewees thought that facilitators and mediators could help overcome those challenges and get more traction on climate-related work. The interviews happened between August 2020 and February 2021, so it spanned a change of administration, so that generated some interesting data. Next slide, please. The things that I want to share with you are the obstacles that the agencies reported in terms of progress in this area, the takeaways as far as the types of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution methods that they thought could help. And then I want to drill down into one of those in particular around tribal engagement and consultation. So on the obstacles to progress, people reported 5. The primary issue at the time was funding. A lot has changed since then with the change of administration, but one interesting thing to note is that the interviewees said that even setting aside the specific content of various administrations' priorities, just the fact that administration priorities are subject to substantial change every 4 to 8 years is an impediment to progress on federal climate initiatives. So the question there was, are there ways that that environmental collaboration tools could be used to help streamline the adjustments that federal staff have to make when the administrations change, expediting the learning curve, institutionalizing core activities, that kind of thing. The second obstacle that rose to the fore was workforce development. And there it involved both the size of the workforce available to work on these climate change related challenges, but also the skill set of the available workforce. Given the intensifying work, more and more pressure was being put on this limiting factor. The kinds of knowledge and skill sets that were reported as in limited supply were those who could help analyze climate change related impacts and vulnerabilities, that understood the forms that resilience and adaptation can take, and how to tailor and implement adaptation approaches by locale and by sector, really taking the regional type data and making sense of it at a more granular scale. The third obstacle was interagency coordination and collaboration, because basically they're reporting that just collaboration within the federal government is quite a challenge in this area, given that the different federal agencies have different missions, different priorities, different procedures, different planning horizons, whether 5 years or 50 years, different approaches to working on climate, different languages or technical jargon, data sets, and technical backgrounds and training. So that's what makes the syncing up across federal agencies challenging. So there was a need identified for collaborative research design and data collection and analysis across federal agencies. The fourth obstacle was collaboration with affected parties. So here I'm talking about between federal agencies and people outside of the federal government. And there is quite a bit of data and analysis demonstrating the benefits of multi-party collaboration in terms of better outcomes, that really more effectively address the problem at hand, improved relationships, saving on time and money, avoiding litigation. But in the climate world, the number of parties affected and the level of controversy and the terminology challenges make it all extra challenging. It was also noted, with 574 federally recognized tribes, you have to work with each tribe individually. This is part of the picture. And the fifth obstacle to progress is information dissemination to the public. And what the interviewees meant there was the need to create a broad understanding across society about the nature of these challenges and building the muscle memory, so to speak, for addressing these challenges. It involves making the public aware of existing information and resources. The interviewees said there's really quite a bit of information available, but getting it out to people, the staff and the networks needed to disseminate the information at the scale it needs to be disseminated at is a limiting factor. The need to make people aware of how to tailor regional data to their local situations. That is part of the public information dissemination challenge. Next slide, please. So in terms of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution methods that interviewees suggested could help with overcoming these challenges, again, 5 items here. The first one being to facilitate and mediate interagency collaboration. So that, again, is within the federal government, help those federal agencies get synced up. Second one is to design, facilitate, and mediate collaborative multi-party dialogue. So again, that is the collaborative processes involving the federal government entities, but also a range of external parties to work together to figure out solutions. The third one, bold-faced, underscored because of the focus of today's webinar, is helping with tribal engagement and consultation. And then the fourth, independent science and joint fact finding. So, so often environmental challenges that have complex science underlying them, it gives rise to a battle of the experts, so to speak, each party having their own expert and the experts arguing about who's right and so on. Well, independent science and joint fact finding refers to the process by which a facilitator may coordinate the efforts of multiple scientists to meet the needs of a collaborative process as a whole. So the scientists are serving the whole group rather than an individual party, and looking for answers in sources that the parties jointly deem as credible. So it's supporting the parties in learning together in a way that reduces the tensions over who's right and who's wrong, and everybody's learning together. And then the fifth area is collaborative capacity building. So that might include training. That comes to mind for most people when you talk about collaborative capacity building, but it also can involve assessment of, what skill sets or procedures do participating agencies or individuals need to strengthen in order to work constructively together. So that could take the form of consulting or coaching, systems design. When you have a series of similar conflicts, you can use collaboration to design a problem-solving system that can be used for this whole series of conflicts. So those are a few examples of collaborative capacity building, the forms that collaborative capacity building can take. Next slide, please. So remember the tribal engagement and consultation piece that was underlined on the last slide. Today's webinar is going to shine some light on that particular area of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution, showing tribal leadership, Native American leadership in this area, different ways that the tools of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution can help include helping raise awareness about the actual process. What's a collaborative process mean? What does it look like? Helping to work together with parties from Indian country, from federal government, to together design a collaborative process that makes sense and works and is comfortable for all concerned. Helping people understand the difference between collaborative engagement and government to government consultation. Collaboration isn't meant to replace government to government consultation. That's between sovereign nations, between the US federal government and between native tribes, tribal leadership. But sometimes people get confused about that. So the mediators and facilitators often contribute by helping people tease that apart. What are we doing in this collaborative process? Where does government to government consultation happen? Which one is needed in which situations? Also, recognizing that when we're working cross-culturally, different parties around the table have different ways of knowing, whether you're relying on indigenous traditional ecological knowledge or whether you're relying on empirical Western science, whether you're relying on spiritual ways of knowing or scientific ways of knowing. How do you, not one or another is not right or wrong, but a facilitator or mediator can help make room for all these different ways of thinking about problem solving and help people acknowledge and respect one another's different approaches, and facilitate communication across those different backgrounds. So that is the context. Next slide, please, for this webinar. And as you recall, we're doing two things with it. We're bringing Mike Durglo to the fore to talk about his approach to facilitating collaboration with respect to cultural resource protection, that when the cultural resources are at risk from climate change impacts. And we're also talking about data sovereignty and how that works out and can be handled constructively in collaborative processes. So doing our best to bring everybody along with, insights and best practices and inspirational ways to get things done in the climate arena. If you want to access the full report, here's the website where you can get it. It's basically the Udall Foundation homepage, and then looking in under the climate service areas or the news and events news archive, that also it's in both places. Okay, well, that is what I wanted to share with you as context for today's webinar. Next, I'd like to bring Stephanie Lucero up to bat. And to say a few more words about Stephanie as she turns our attention to the data sovereignty topic. So Stephanie has been with the foundation for about 6 years, and she is a senior program manager. As I mentioned, she leads the Native American and Alaska Native service area. She's also the lead trainer for the center's collaboration with Native nations and tribal consultation training. She's been working in this field for a good 18 years or more. She brings with her a Master's of Law in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy, as well as a JD from Berkeley and a Bachelor of Arts in English and Native American Studies from Berkeley. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Stephanie Lucero.
Thank you, Marcy, and welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to go just to the next slide. Basically, what we wanted to provide to you today is just some insights from working in data sovereignty and environmental collaboration and conflict resolution. And I want to preface before I get too far along that I am not an expert on Indigenous data sovereignty, but I work in the field enough where Indigenous data sovereignty is a really important part of the National Center's work, and specifically in the context of the assessment findings and working with Native nations, both in terms of tribal engagement, as well as the concept of joint fact-finding and co-development of science and understanding. So because we're talking about a lot of different phrases, I wanted to start off with this phrases and resources. My colleagues will be putting in the chat box all of the links that are listed there, as well as additional ones I might be sharing. But because this is a lot of links, I wanted to also just share with you a little bit while I go through these. You're joined by Bilbo Baggins, colloquially known as Bilbo Baggins. He's a res dog from the Taos Pueblo. So it's courtesy of one of our colleagues, Lauren Cordova. So if you're not a big fan of that, you enjoy Bilbo. But let's get into ECCR. So Brian mentioned environmental collaboration and conflict resolution. And just for context, there's a CEQ memo that we're posting in there that defines ECCR. Various agencies that do this type of work in collaboration and conflict resolution have definitions. But for the purposes of today, I'd like to focus on the definition of ECCR as people with differing views and interests, or you might say worldviews, working together in a systematic and organized way to find a workable solution to a shared problem about an environmental issue, a natural resource issue, and then, as we very often point out, cultural resources tied to the land, since that is very much a prevalent factor of our work with Native nations. So that's just the context I'd like you to think about in that frame of people with differing views working together to solve conflicts. The other term that we're going to use a lot in the next 15 minutes is Indigenous data sovereignty. And there's a lot of really great definitions. I would turn you to Native Nations Institute at University of Arizona. They're affiliated with us. They have a whole website and research and policy section on Indigenous data sovereignty. But one of the factors of Indigenous data sovereignty that we really wanted to focus on is it's about the right of a nation to govern the collection, preservation, ownership, and application of their data. And it's really focused on an inherent right of people to govern their own lands, resources, and people. But from an ECCR standpoint, and again, based on what we're talking about today, I like to think about Indigenous data sovereignty is about maintaining the relationships between the data and the people. Who are we talking about? What are we talking about? Where is it referring to? And what are those relationships involved? So those are just some context and definitions to rely on. The other points we have there, I'll get into the CARE principles in a minute. That's a great link to the additional information on the CARE principles. But other factors to look at is a lot of this about Indigenous data sovereignty and the work we're talking about is really reliant on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and specifically free and prior informed consent. Free, prior informed consent for the use of data, collection of data, how it's used, how it's stewarded and preserved. Likewise, there's some great information if you haven't looked at the OSTP's Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge Guidance to U.S. federal agencies, and the accompanying implementation memo. We have those links in there. They're really great resources for this thought process and these materials. So I just wanted to throw those out there before I give you any more information. But I do want to dive a little bit deeper into this concept of the CARE principles. So the CARE principles were created, derived, developed in part in response to these FAIR principles. This is a great infographic. Be fair and care, right? So the FAIR principles are associated with a move towards more computational data, creating easily accessible, easily transmittable and shareable data, using computer systems, but with the intent to minimize human intervention in that data collection and distribution. And if you've worked in this field, working with Indigenous nations, you understand Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, that removal of the human component, the people component, can cause some tension when we're dealing with supporting tribal self-determination, governance, and decision-making, particularly in environmental natural resources, the stuff that we do every day. So the CARE principles is really intended, and this is a direct quote from that website we shared with you. The CARE principles are derived to create value from Indigenous data in ways that are grounded in Indigenous worldviews, right? So I think that's a really good clarification of what the CARE principles mean for this idea of open and accessible data. We, as federal agencies, under the laws that we're required to follow, there's a lot of requirement for transparency and disclosure of the data that's used for decision making. But in the terms of doing that, there's also an important understanding of maintaining good government-to-government relationships, honoring and acknowledging tribal sovereignty and self-determination, and data sovereignty is a part of that. So the CARE principles are really intended to put the people back into the data, right? That the people and the purpose are really oriented to those Indigenous values, Indigenous views, and it allows for a space to be fair, open, accessible, accountable, but also look at these care principles, collective benefit of the data, authority to control the data resting in Indigenous communities that created the responsibility, and looking through this data sharing concept through an ethical lens. So this is a great infographic. I wanted to share that as we think through Indigenous data sovereignty and how we incorporate that. So as you've probably gathered through this discussion, we thought in order to kind of ground us in a discussion of interweaving ITEK with other worldviews and science models, it's really emphasize the importance of data sovereignty. Acknowledging and understanding Indigenous data sovereignty is integral to having open and meaningful dialogues, to honoring tribal and Indigenous self-determination, and making sure that the sharing of knowledge, also this sharing of knowledge requires an acknowledgement of data sovereignty. And in order to have that creative opportunity that we see in environmental collaboration and conflict resolution, those open dialogues, that shared joint decision-making, that shared fact-finding and joint knowledge development, we really need to have that basis of Indigenous data sovereignty as our kind of fundamental pillar. So I wanted to leave you before I jump in and get to the good stuff, so to speak. I was going to leave you with a couple considerations. So first considerations, or throughout the considerations, and these are questions that we use and just a tool for you all, and yes, we will be sharing the slides afterwards, but questions to consider prior to collecting or using tribal data or working with Indigenous knowledge. And first and foremost, is the tribe willing to participate in the knowledge sharing and co-creation? Like, where is the consent, that free, prior, and informed consent? And so that's part of it. The other component, and we talk about this a lot, generally in terms of government to government relationship and kind of understanding what comments that the tribes already shared with you. What is the information that's already been shared? How do we limit the requirement for our Indigenous partners and tribal nations to share information they've already shared with their federal partners? Data collection and data is also part of that. What information and data is already available? What is the information that's already been shared? Either it's publicly available, or it's available through the federal agencies, or we talked about that interagency coordination through other federal partners. But within that, what data is already available from an Indigenous data sovereignty frame, we also have some caveats, right? So the federal government, federal agencies have been working with Indigenous nations. Academia has been working with Indigenous nations for generations. And it's a constantly evolving and improving relationship. So we want to be cautious when we're using older data or available data, and make sure to ask the question and have a dialogue with tribal partners. Was this data that we have gathered in a responsible and respectful way? Because we may not want to use data that isn't taking in those care principles or created in a way that respects Indigenous data sovereignty. Likewise, if that data wasn't collected in a reasonable or responsible way, there could be impacts in the way of how that data is responsive to the questions we're asking, or whether or not it was misused or mischaracterized, right? So those are additional questions we might want to ask with data that we're relying on that was gathered before. So those kind of sub-questions we have there are opportunities for dialogue when we're talking about Indigenous data sovereignty. We're setting up a good process for co-development and interweaving Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. So those are some questions. And then at the end of the day, it's always good practice when you're asking to share or co-create information to have a really good shared understanding, a mutual understanding about how the data you're either using or creating together will be used, and specifically used in an ECCR process. So those are just some questions we wanted to offer you to think about. They're good kind of grounding pieces that I use, and I know my colleagues use in our work as we constantly work to develop processes that incorporate Indigenous data sovereignty. So with that, that's a lot of information, and it's really just to kind of start you out. there's so much more to learn, and we're constantly evolving in that information sharing. So if we could go to the next slide. Yep, there we go. Oh, sorry, back. We have a couple resources at the National Center. Encourage you to look at those. We'll be sharing these. And we are learning with you, so feel free to come back to us and share your information. And we look forward to the questions at the end of Mike's presentation. I'll turn it back to you, Marcy.
Excellent, Stephanie. Thank you so much. So next up is Mike Durglo Jr., who I had the privilege of first hearing in the context of a presentation he made to the Missouri River Recovery Implementation Committee. And it was so impressive. I followed up to see if he would be willing to do this presentation. And I want to share, I already mentioned that Mike is the climate change coordinator for the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. He has so much to bring forward about him. I'm just going to hit a few highlights. He's been working in the climate change world as a leader in that area for over a decade in the US and in Canada. He facilitated the development of a Flathead Reservation climate change strategic plan for the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. He has also created the Environmental Advocates for Global and Local Ecological Sustainability, or EAGLES program, to engage youth from the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes in ongoing climate education and action. He's received the White House Champion of Change Award and the Climate Leadership Award for Natural Resources, and he was recently appointed to serve on the Advisory Council for Climate Adaptation and Science by Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. So honored to have Mike speak to us. Thank you, Mike, for being willing to do it. I'm turning the floor over to you to share your approach and a particular success story with Glacier National Park. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Marcy. And thanks to the foundation for inviting me. I'm honored and I'm happy to be here with you all today. You could go to the next slide. And if anybody has any questions or anything like that, my email was on the bottom of that first slide. And also, I don't know if I have it in here, but you could check out our website. It's csktclimate.org. And if somebody would put that in the chat, I would really appreciate it. So the Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribe, well, let me start over. Chetskwext or Chetschalcha Pesia, Etcheswisam Chet Louis Quext, Kisut Quicknum Oxmaknik Hukatlik Skawiska Cloutla. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stanley Grizzly Bear. That's my given name. My English or my Suyapi name is Mike Durglo, as Marcy shared with you already. And I've actually been working for the tribe for 40 years as of July. So 40 years, 9 months, 4 days, and 5 hours. Most of those years were in natural resources, and just the last probably 8 years, I've been the department head for tribal historic preservation. And as of October 1 of this year, I became the full-time climate coordinator for the tribe. So it's good to be here. And this is a little bit about our tribe. There's about 1,200 employees, which include tribal and non-tribal. And our reservation is located in northwest Montana. I think you could go to the next slide. That might show where we're located in Montana. So we are about 3 hours south of Canada and 2 hours east of Idaho. The reservation was established in 1855 in the Hellgate Treaty. And the reservation, it consists of about 1.3 million acres and close to 8,000 tribal enrolled members on the reservation. Well, not everybody lives on, about maybe half of that live on the reservation, maybe more than half, I don't know. I don't know for sure. Next slide, please. So we we're one of the first tribes in the United States to develop a climate strategy. That was in 2012. I think when I started, and I was the environmental director when we started that process, my supervisor and his supervisor actually called me into the office, and I was like, oh shit, what did I do now? But they said, Mike, a lot of people are asking what our tribe's doing about climate change, and we want you to develop a plan for us, a strategy. So really had no idea how to go about doing that. I actually brought in a lot of very intelligent people, and I participated in some workshops put on by ITEP, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. They are out of Northern Arizona University. And when I started, that was in September of 2012. The Swinomish tribe had finished theirs, I believe, in 2009, and the Nez Perce was working on theirs when we started. And one of the things that I felt was very important about developing that plan, and I think Marcy and Stephanie might have mentioned some of that earlier on about inclusion of indigenous knowledge, and also using Western science in that whole process. So this is one of the things, one of the best things I think for me personally in developing that plan was interviewing my elders. And you'll see in another slide, my dad was one of those elders, and he really supported the work that I was doing in climate change and natural resources. And well, I always felt like natural resources and cultural resources are the same thing that we're talking about. So when I went from environmental protection to preservation, historic preservation, I told my tribal council that I'm not doing anything different. I'm still protecting the resources. And one of the big, I guess, messages that I heard is the land and the resources are the basis for our spiritual life. And I'm not going to read all these. You guys can read them. And it's been that way since time immemorial, since time began for us. And it continues to be that way for us. And all of that really depends on clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife and fish, and all the things that we rely on in being who we are in indigenous people. Next slide. This is my dad. He passed away, I think, about 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago now, but he was really supportive and came to all my planning meetings and really supported me in the process of and continued even after we completed our plan, continued to support me. And he was actually the department head for tribal historic preservation when I was the environmental director. And then after he passed, I put in for his job. So I was really blessed in that I was in his job, got his old job in his old office. So that was really awesome. And I'm still here in preservation, but actually the climate coordinator now. And in the process of interviewing the elders, and like I said, that was the most fulfilling part of that whole process, was just visiting with them. And I mean, it's like you don't tell your elders, well, we have 30 minutes or we have 20 minutes or whatever. I mean, some of the elders, we talked for hours, and a lot of information, a lot of stories about not necessarily all about climate change, but a lot of different things. And one of the things my dad and he always took us up in the mountains to gather different roots and berries and tea, mountain tea, and our medicines. And he was very concerned for those things that are up in the mountain. Well, basically everywhere because of the changing climate. And last year was pretty much the first year that I remember that Flathead Lake didn't completely full. It didn't get to full pool. And I'm afraid that this year the same thing is going to happen. I mean, today it's a beautiful day outside, and it's around 50 degrees, and it's supposed to be like 65 next week. And we just don't have the snowpack that's going to be able to fill the lake. And I mean, a lot of it for irrigation, but the fish and the wildlife are going to be suffering. So next slide. So back in, I think, 2020, about 2 years ago, we got funding from BIA to what I say is that we're working on rewriting our plan. We developed the plan in 2012. We did an update in 2015 or 16, and now we're in the process of almost rewriting it because the data, the Western science and the data and the projection that we were looking at back then, I felt like they're really conservative. Maybe we were hoping that things was going to change for the better, but we all know that. I mean, we were looking at projections that said that the mean average temperature was going to be this level, 2040, 2050, and all these different. But we know that all of that is happening at a much faster pace. So all of this is available on that website that was shared on the chat earlier. And next slide. Oh, let me talk a little bit more about that one. In our plan, we identified 9 sectors, and those are the 9. And some of the tribes have plans that really focus on water or sea level rise or whatever. So, there's not one way to develop a plan or a strategy. We chose to include all of these because really they're all connected. Next slide. This is an illustration. I was invited to go to Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and work with the Department of Interior, along with some very awesome Indigenous knowledge holders, Anne Marie Chischilly, James Rattling Leaf, and I can't remember all of the names. I think there was 6 of us there, and I still have my name tag that says I'm a subject matter expert. I've never been called that before, but it's pretty awesome because I think it's the first time that we were actually invited to work on a guide book or a guidance for Department of Interior around Indigenous knowledge. And that guidebook, I believe, should be coming out soon. So the bullet points in that illustration, and I'll tell you a little bit about the illustration itself. That represents, oh my gosh, I was back in, I think, 2009. I was the environmental director for the tribe, and I was the chairman of the RTOC, Regional Tribal Operations Committee, and a co-chair on the National Tribal Science Council. And we had a meeting in Washington, D.C., and actually, I don't remember, it was the Onondaga Chief Oren Lion. They invited us to their longhouse, and they talked about the two-row wampum. And if you've never heard about it, I encourage you to look it up, because what the two-row wampum belt represents is 2 distinct, so there's 2 rows, and the ship, colonial ship, and the canoe represent those 2 rows. And basically for me, it's 2 two ships going down the same waterway. And I used to say that part of my job is to indigenize Western science, right? But I don't say that no more. I say that we help each other out, and it's not for me to indigenize you, and it's not for you to assimilate me. We are each on our own vessels, and we help each other along the way. That, to me, represents that indigenous knowledge and that Western science. And as we, if we traveling, if you think about traveling down the river, there's some, we might come to some rapids, so we help each other out there, and we use that knowledge to help each other and have that respect. And so the bullets there all came out of that workshop that we did at Shepherdstown. And the first thing that we really talked quite a lot about was the acknowledgement of the historical harms. And for me, it's like, we really need to recognize, not dwell on it, but recognize that, yes, there are historical harms. And when that happens, it's really hard to build a good, trusting relationship. So you need to really acknowledge that and get through that. And all the rest of those are, the IK is indigenous knowledge is in the land and with the communities, the relationship to the people and to Mother Earth, walk in beauty and inspire, respect each other, engagement versus consultation, and understanding capacity, and finally, no means no. And that's something that Stephanie talked about with sharing of indigenous knowledge, right? Sometimes they're just going to say no. The elders are just going to say no. We're not going to share that knowledge. So it's a challenge sometimes to help people understand what that relationship is to Mother Earth for us, and then being able to share that with other people. Next slide, please. So this came, I kind of, I don't know. Sometimes I wake up, I don't know if anybody else does it. I wake up like 3 o'clock in the morning and I have this in my head and like going around, and I have to get up and I have to do this. And that other illustration with the ship and the canoe was the same way. And this one represents, and each one of these pictures, these drawings represent a sector of our strategy. And this whole thing, for me, it represents that all things are connected. And what it was, so I live in the Mission Valley. The Rocky Mountains are right behind my house. This picture behind me is not, but it looks like a place right behind my house. Anyway, so the mountains are right behind my house, and I call it my awake vision. In my awake vision, I seen a pika. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a little rodent. They live at the top of the mountain, and they really depend on that cold and snow. And when I seen that pika, it was like the very last pika. And that pika died. And when that pika died, there was a deer in the field or the meadow behind my house. When that pika died, that deer lifted her head. And she lifted her head because she felt, or she knew that something just happened, and she felt a change in the sacred circle of life. And that change happens every time we lose a species, or even a plant or an animal or anything. Anything goes extinct, that circle of life changes. And this is what this represents, and it represents the fact that all of these things are connected. Next slide, please. And this is, I don't know if people are familiar with the RAD framework, resist, accept, direct, it's kind of a new concept or thing that come out, and some of the agencies, I think Forest Service is doing some of this work. I'm actually doing a project with I started with Stefan Tangent. He's with the North Central CASC, Climate Adaptation and Science Center. And the project is up at Glacier National Park. And really to me, it's building relationships, right? And in order to build a good, trusting relationship, you need to start with a foundation. And my foundation in a teepee is about communication, collaboration, coordination, and cooperation. And so this is another one of those 3 a.m. Things that come to my head. And basically, it's having that relationship, or if you're going to do a project like up in Glacier National Park, you need to engage the tribes from the concept or conceptual stage to the completion. And the example I use behind that is just, and they don't have to do this, but if Glacier Park needed to replace St. Mary's Bridge, generally, and a lot of the departments do this, they will hire an engineer to design the new bridge. They'll make the plans, and then they send them to us to review. Well, and then we say, nope, that ain't gonna work, because that bridge is right in the middle of a huge historic campsite, and there are lithic scatters all over there. So you need to reduce the size of that footprint. Oh, and also wherever you can, fill in instead of digging up. So those are some of the things that we prefer them to do, is fill, not dig, where they can do that. So that's not a project, but I'm just using that as an example. But so when we say no, I mean, you've already spent what, $10,000 on developing this plan, and then we see it and we say, no, you need to do it different. Well, if you would have invited us to the table from the very beginning, we could have saved you a lot of money and building a good working relationship from the very beginning. And that in the middle where the flap is, or whatever, the pins that hold that together are 7 generations, and looking back 7 generations and forward 7 generations. Well, next slide, please. This is another project I did in Glacier National Park with, so I'm part of the National Park Service Tribal Engagement Working Group, and we have monthly calls. And in the calls, they were talking about a project that they did over on the East Coast, looking at climate impacts to historic sites I don't remember what national park it was, but they were doing a project looking at impacts to those sites on the East Coast. And I'm like, hey, can we do something here in Glacier National Park? Because we have a good working relationship, and there's all these historic sites, cultural sites that are in the park that we'd like to look at. And so they said, yeah, they found some funding to do that, and it's with North Carolina State University. Could go to the next slide. I think it shows, Aaron C. Camp, and is with North Carolina State University, and Sierra Mandelco is with the park. So we've been working together. I did I don't know if it's on the next slide, but I'll just talk about it. We looked at, there's over, I think, 300 or more sites in the park, and we picked 9 of them to look at. And the purpose was to first of all identify those sites and then figure out what is the potential impact or what is the impact that's happening to those sites. And then so we selected them partners. We set up workshops with the elders before we went to the sites, and then we had another workshop with them after. And then I think we visited with them, and then we took them to the sites, and then we had a post project workshop with the elders. And a lot of the things they said was, we should be engaging some of the youth, bringing some of the kids up here so that they can see and learn about these cultural sites and the significance of them. So I just heard not too long ago from Erin Seacamp from NCSU that she did find some more funding to help us continue this. And the plan is for this summer to bring the elders up to more sites to visit and bring some of the kids too. So next slide. Yep. So we looked at 9 sites. As I said, there's over 300 sites. So we tried to look at the different exposures, the sensitivities, what type the site types was. Some of them were like in that one picture, it was a culturally modified tree. There was some another site that was a historic campsite where was called the Bison Crossing, where they crossed the stream, and that is a huge campsite, historic campsite also. And so we did visit those sites, and we want to continue that work this summer with the elders, some of the kids. Next slide. Francis is one of the elders that came with us, and as you well know, and I think I shared this, how significant and important these areas are to the people. I don't know if I mentioned this. So the CSKT, the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribe, is actually 3 tribes. The Pend d'Oreille, Lewis and Clark called us Pend d'Oreille, but we're really Kalispet, and the Kootenai tribe and the Flatheads. The Flatheads were basically down in the Bitterroot Valley. The Kalispels were up around Flathead Lake area. I am Kalispet, so this was really our area, and we did a lot of gathering, hunting, fishing, and all that in the park area. Next slide. So this is the recommendations that came out of that. Really along, and one of the other things that the elders said was that, it's really important that we establish long-term relationships, not something that's one and done, which happens quite often. And it's like it kind of causes some mistrust in that, some of these folks come in and they want to study whatever it is, huckleberry phenology or something like that, and then they do their study and then we never see them again. So this is something that was important to the elders, that we build a long-term relationship within the park, and that's actually what's happening. So that's a good thing. Next slide. Oh, that was quick. How much time do I have left?
You're right on track for
Okay, cool.
wrap up mode.
Cool. So I don't know if I told you this, but questions are $20, answers are $30. So, and I'll put my Venmo information in one of the slides there. This is actually Stephen, Small Salmon, and Piper. Stephen and Piper were at one of my community gatherings, and we got a picture. Stephen, so I interviewed 8 elders in the process of developing our plan, right? And Stephen is the only elder that's still with us. So I'm so grateful for Stephen, and he continues. He's like my dad, kind of, he really supports the work, and I always call Stephen to come and open up our meetings with prayers and stuff like that. So I'll be done in a minute. I've got a moment. So he's very much involved still. Really appreciate his.
It's a lovely picture. Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. Fabulous. I do want to invite attendees now to put any questions you may have for Stephanie Lucero or for Mike Durglo into the chat. And Elise Megan, my colleague, will be looking for themes in the questions and bringing them forward. And while you all are thinking about questions to put in the chat and going ahead and putting them there, I would like to draw Mike out on a particular aspect of the Glacier National Park project that you, Mike, had shared with me in earlier conversations. It has to do with data sovereignty and the trust building that was necessary between the elders and the academics from North Carolina before the elders would be comfortable with bringing the academics to these special sites. Do you want to say anything more about that?
No. It was a learning. I've lived here. I was born here. I've lived here all my life, and you really can't take that for granted, because one of the things that I felt like, and I was raised around culture. My grandmother didn't speak any English. My dad was a fluent speaker, so I was raised around the culture, and when Erin and there was 2 interns that came with her from North Carolina, the elders were saying like, Mike, what the hell you doing bringing those people over here from the East Coast to bring them up to show them our cultural sites? That's not, yeah. So it took a little while for them to actually build that trust and knowing that we're not going to share that data. It's not going to be out there public. The sites are basically, they're already identified. So the park has GPS locations of all the sites, but they don't share that data.
Thank you,
So,
Mike.
I mean, even for me, it was a learning, there was some learning going on. It's like, okay, I need to take a step back here and make sure that I really engage them prior to even, going out in the field or anything.
Thank you very much. I wanted to draw that out because it links between what you and Stephanie Lucero have each shared, gets to the trust building necessary around working with sensitive data. Elise, do you have any questions that you want to bring forward from the chat screen at this point?
Yes, I'm seeing 2 questions, both for Mike. The first one was, Mike, can you speak to how you are implementing co-management?
How is that from Doug Cluck, by the way? I see Doug on it.
It's not, but he did say hello to you in the chat as well.
I saw that. Hey, Doug. So comment, that's one of the things that I'm working on currently around that RAD framework, right? And one of the things that I'm working on with a couple other folks, one from the University of Montana and one with Missoula County Climate Movement, or I can't remember exactly what, but we're planning a workshop. And in that RAD workshop, we're going to talk about how do you make better communication and cooperation and all, and as I've questioned some of the resource managers, they're like, well, we do share data. There's like, because the North Fork of the Flathead goes up into the Glacier National Park, and that's what fills Flathead Lake, which is on the reservation. So that whole watershed is connected. And when they start looking at protection and preservation of like bull trout or native species, they do communicate. But there's not really, you know, I guess it would be sharing data, but not really sitting down together, like around a table and saying, you know, this is what's going on here. You know, what are you guys doing up there? What can we do? What can we do together? What can we, you know, some of the things, and white bark pine is one of them that we've been working on, cross boundaries. So, yep. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's.
Well, actually, that was a really great answer, because it kind of prompts the following question which we received, which was about the RAD concept, and specifically asking, sometimes it challenges with getting the community to move past just the resist concept of RAD, and how you've been able to approach that. That was the second question that we got.
Yeah, I think in that the example that I used around St. Mary's Bridge, right? It's like the resist part was, you know what, you should have called us a long time ago. We'd have saved you a few $1,000s if you'd invited us to the table. That goes both ways, right? You know, I have been, and I know a lot of that is around capacity. And, you know, the staff members here are so busy doing their jobs here that sometimes it's like, well, you know, I'd really like to go to that meeting, but I'm so busy here, like I can't go.
Thanks,
Yes,
Mike.
go ahead, Elise. I see the
sorry.
chats.
Yes, I
Go
just
ahead,
want to say
Elise.
that I got some feedback, so I'm going to read the question as written to make sure that I'm not re-paraphrasing and miss the intent there. So bear with me. Apologies for that. As written, it says, in the drawing where Mike very briefly discussed RAD, resist, accept, direct, how is the tribe addressing this concept? I took a RAD training, and given how our belief system is based on our creation story and our foods, I don't know how our community would support and accept anything other than resist within this framework. How are you approaching RAD? And then it says the who question is important. It's not really based on capacity. The question is not based around capacity. It's around belief systems.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know for sure. It's such a new thing, right? And I don't know all that much about the whole process, but it seems to me that early engagement and trust building, communication, cooperation, all that stuff is so important. And, you know, if you go back to the ship and the canoe illustration, it's, you know, there's sometimes that they're going to say no. No means no. And it's like trying to build up that trust and that relationship. And some of that is really hard. You remember that executive order that came out, basically directing the agencies to do a better job of consultation. It was like 17135 or something like that. It's like executive order. But when that came out, I was like, yes, yeah, it's finally going to happen. And the other thing I thought is that there's agencies that are sitting there scratching their head saying, how can we do this? We've been trying to work with that tribe for however many years, and it's like, no. And the tribes are doing it. Some of the tribes are doing the same thing. They're like, you know, scratching their head, how do we do this? Or even saying, oh, hell no, we ain't going to work with them. We've been trying to work with them for 50 years and we just won't. So, you know, those relationships are based on a strong foundation and building that foundation on trust. And that takes time. It may not even, you know, happen but you know, we move the needle forward slowly sometimes. And it's up to us to build those trusting relationships.
you, Mike. And I wanted to see if Stephanie Lucero would like to offer any additional insights related to the RAD question.
Thank you.
You bet.
Give me a break.
Well, I mean, I think Mike covered a lot of really important points. And I think, Mike, you had that great diagram of the bullets of no means no. And obviously this might not work for all communities, because even explaining why you're saying no could be a problem that your elders or community members I've seen may not feel comfortable doing, right, Mike? Like they may not want to explain why, like just accept that no means no. But to the extent that you can, and to the extent you can help kind of share some light, maybe not describe the belief system, but just clarify, like there really isn't an opportunity within Indigenous knowledge to accept the ecosystem change, or, we don't want to direct the ecosystem towards change, which is what, accept and direct can sometimes mean. So, even just clarifying, the importance of the existing ecosystem or systems that need to be maintained or restored, just emphasizing those might help move the dialogue towards, the accepting and directing aren't an option. So how do we resist? What are the mitigation measures? What are the things that we can do? Why do you think we can't resist? Like maybe opening that dialogue can sometimes help and support where tribal community members are. So that would just be some of the things I sometimes suggest. I don't know how you think about that, Mike.
Anything you want to say, picking up on Stephanie's comments, Mike? No pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree. That's, and I saw another question about turnover. That has to do with capacity too, but there's a lot of turnover within the tribal organizations, and there's a lot of turnover within the agencies, right? It seemed like, I don't remember, I did a presentation with the Park Service superintendents not too long ago, and it's like you just start to get to know one and they have to move on, and that part of that whole their requirement, they can only stay in one park for so long, the national park, and then they have to move to another one. It's like, well, we just started to get to know this guy and we started to build that trust and a relationship. Now you're moving him. So,
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge for us. I mean, I don't know how to fix that issue with any of us, but it's one of those things that we can't just throw our hands up and say, I give up. It's always going to be there. That challenge is always going to be there.
Yep. Thank you, both of you. Elise, would you like to bring another question into the mix?
Kind of on a similar vein, I think probably either Stephanie Lucero or Mike Durglo can take this question, but maybe speak to some of the process structures to kind of facilitate some of that trust building between agencies and tribes. Kind of building off what the other question about kind of the turnover, just like how to build trust and processes to facilitate that trust.
Either Mike or Lucero could jump in on that one.
I can start, Mike, give you a break and
Thanks.
have you add in. So, I mean, I think first and foremost, any process or structure design, you need to look at what works for the parties, right? Like folks may not be at a place to come together right away. Maybe you need to do some training, capacity building for the agency partners. So, I mean, those processes really depend on situations. I've seen folks where there's some kind of separate site visits or separate discussions that happen. Generally, the best framework is when you can get people on the land together. Get folks out in the land together where everybody feels comfortable. It's a space where there's comfort in getting together and kind of sharing that relationship with the land together between the parties in the process. And if you can't get out into the land, figuring out ways to make those connections, pictures, song, discussion, story, some facilitators call them icebreakers. I just call them good dialogue. But just so people can kind of see those connections. So those are process structures. And then the building trust and sense of unity, I think the building trust and the sense of unity can sometimes be the facilitator's role as well, right? In those conversations, are folks having a shared understanding? Are they really listening and hearing and figuring out a way to find agreement where they're not putting their own perspectives on what's being discussed, but they have a shared discussion about it? Are those being recorded, in notes? And do folks feel comfortable with the way the notes are being recorded? How are we following up? Are we making sure that what was discussed and agreed to is happening, and who's responsible for doing that? So that's the role of the facilitator, that I would say, in terms of some of those questions. And then this kind of relates also to the turnover. I've actually been working with some tribes where, because of the new guidelines to federal agencies, they're actually developing the core curriculum. They're developing the pieces that they want new employees to understand before they walk in the room and talk with their communities. So that could be a way to build the trust. What do we think is important for you to learn? And then also to address that turnover. So I'll stop there, Mike, and see if you want to add anything.
No, you did good. I guess, one of the things that I don't know if everybody's aware of in the guidebook that we developed for the Department of Interior, there's kind of two different, so that one of them is the guidebook, and the other thing that we talked about is the training. So depending on what level you work in the department, if you work directly with tribes, then you will have to go to the training, and that training will be longer than 8 hours, I think we talked about. If you do not work directly with tribes, then you just have to go through the guidebook. So it's different levels of understanding. And here in the preservation department, we developed, and this was before I came on, they developed like a training, cultural awareness training. So they've done that for the highway department, Bonneville Power, all these different organizations. And that's one of the things I talked about. I was actually, well, Marcy, you shared, I was in DC with Deb Holland week before last. And that's one of the things I shared there, is that, having that ability to do that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, Stephanie Lucero. Well, we are just at about time to shift into wrap-up mode, and I want to thank both of our presenters, Stephanie Lucero and Mike Durglo. Excellent presentations. Thank you for all the time you put into preparing your remarks and being here to share them. Let's see, I also want to thank the attendees for your good questions. We do have, I think, Elise, is it fair to say that we've answered virtually all the questions, but we did just get one more? Do you want to take a stab at that, and then we'll wrap up?
Sure. Regarding trainings, we've discussed the need to train the tribes and how we work with the feds. Yes, the feds need to be trained in how to work with the tribes, but we also need the reverse. Is that something being considered?
That's a great
And I think
question.
that's open to either Stephanie or Mike to take a stab at that.
Either one of you want to jump into that?
I don't know. I agree.
All right. And
I don't
Stephanie,
disagree with that. Yeah, I think that works both ways. Like, I think I did say that earlier. It's just, that's part of the trust building, I guess, is, we need to learn how to work with the agencies, and they need to work with us.
well said. Lucero?
I would totally agree. It's all about, shared learning and working together and figuring out how to work together. And I will put a plug for our partners. I know the Native Nations Institute does self-determination training. Sometimes that covers it. We also, one of our projects is actually doing a shared learning between the tribe and the federal agency of what are not only what are the things that the tribe wants the agency to understand about working with them, but also helping the tribal representatives understand what the requirements that the agency has, where are there opportunities for collaboration. And the intent of that is really to help the tribe guide the agency in thinking through how to be a better partner, right? Like, where are there flexibilities? Where are there not flexibilities? Maybe we go to Congress instead of talking to the agency rep, like where are the pathways for the tribe to exercise its self-governance in this partnership relationship with the federal government? So I fully and completely endorse and think that's a great idea. We got to get the support and energy to do it. So
Very good. All right. Well, thank you to our those of you who have posed questions. They were excellent questions and enriched the whole experience for everybody, I think. Speaking of training, why don't we go to the next slide? We did want to share with you the upcoming trainings offered through the National Center. And Rachel, if you would like to just orient people to what these are, you'd probably be the best person to do that.
Sure, of course. Thanks, Marcy. So yeah, so we have 4 trainings that are already scheduled for this upcoming year. So we have one that's actually coming up in March that's going to be in person at our Tucson office. It's one of the parts of our Fundamentals of ECCR series. So we have 2 parts. There's a course 1 and course 2. They're both being offered in person at our Tucson office in May and March, as you can see on the screen. We also have our Collaboration with Native Nations and Tribal Consultation course, which will also be offered in June. This is actually going to be virtual via Zoom. So it's half days for 4 days. And then we have our Collaboration in NEPA course that will be in person in our DC office in August. So you can find all those on our website too. And I will just say that we offer each one of these courses about 1 to 2 times a year. And with the exception of the course 2 of the Fundamentals of ECCR series, the Crafting Collaborative Solutions course, they're all offered virtually and in person. We alternate whether it's offered virtually or in person. So there's kind of some flexibility if you're interested in attending any of those. So, and you can also email me. I think my email's on a later slide. So if you have any questions in particular about training, I'm happy to answer them.
Fabulous. Thank you, Rachel. And at least you put something in the chat screen that there's another a webinar that people might want to know about. You want to
Yes,
say
I
something
actually
there?
might redirect to Stephanie Lucero, just
Okay.
explain a little bit about that, if that's okay.
yeah,
Sure.
just letting folks know, some of you are already on the list. The Native American Alaska Native Service Area is continuing a discussion on mentorship, pathways to environmental collaboration and conflict resolution. We haven't even put it out on the press, so you're the first to know. May 7th, they'll register. The registration links in the chat, and you can also just email us if you want to register.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will send to all of those who registered for this event the slides that we used and also a few supplemental resources. And we'll post the recording of the webinar on our website in case you want to share, point colleagues to it who wanted to be here but couldn't be. Thank you again, Mike and Lucero. Thank you to the whole Udall team for collaborating on pulling this together. Thank you, those of you who attended. We had a nice time together.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.